Hello, my name is Breck Light. I'm the owner of Bold Branch Beef, which is a grass-fed and finished farm here in Lynchburg, Virginia. And today I want to talk about the difference between grass-fed beef, grain-fed beef, and grass-finished beef. There's a big misconception out there that grass-fed don't really mean all that people think, which is a real shame. Because I think there are companies out there really pulling the wool over consumers. So we'll start with grain fed. Grain fed means exactly what it sounds like. The animal, cow in this case, is fed grain at some point in their lives. A lot of times, what will happen is the farmer will be raising the animal, and by about the time they're weaned, from 6 to 8 months or so, they start introducing grain into the animal's diet, and usually that's every day, anywhere between 2 and 6, 7, 8 pounds of grain a day. It usually depends on what the farmer can afford, which is tied to the market price, that kind of thing. And the animal, when they're, it depends, but anywhere from a year to 2 years old, they get loaded up on a truck, sent down to the community market, where they're auctioned off in lots, and from there they get shipped usually out west to the feedlots, and there are also a bunch of feedlots in Florida. My part of the country, we actually ship out west, but it also depends on the buyer and things like that. So the animals get shipped out west, and from there they're on the range for a while. Most of it's public land, so the companies that are out there get it for dirt cheap. Um, the government and a lot of these big corporations have a lot of they're friends with each other. They give each other a lot of jobs. It's kind of a backwoods, cooked up, good old boy network. But it is what it is, unfortunately. Um, and so they're running animals on public land for almost nothing. And out there, they're just eating grass. And then they take them into the feedlots. And when they get in the feedlots, they give them antibiotics, growth hormones, the tag behind the ear. And that's when they start really putting a lot of grain in them. The benefits of grain is that it adds fat to the animal. Fat, which is what we call marbling, is one of the big things that an animal has to have in order to qualify for things like certified Angus beef. Actually, to figure out the quality of the beef, the processor will cut between the 12th and 13th rib, and then based on meat quality, marbling, that kind of thing, they decide what the animal is going to be. Is it going to be prime, choice, select, all that stuff? I always forget what they all are. I think prime is the best, but I don't remember. Thankfully, I'm a ways away from that world. Um, but then, while the animal's there, they're gonna probably be finished out for six months to a year until they get big enough. They like them in the 1,100 pound range, um, and they just get fattened up. The other benefit besides just marbling with feeding an animal grain is they put on a lot of weight quickly, and their growth rates get big. And a lot of times those antibiotics are put into the grain. You can't pack a couple thousand animals into a small piece of space without using antibiotics. Disease will rip through them, and also a cow, they're ruminants, so their stomach is built. It has four chambers in it. They don't have four stomachs; they have four chambers in their stomach. Their stomach is built to process grass. They're supposed to go out there and take a low source nutrition, grass, legumes, weeds, whatever you want to call them, just stuff that grows in a natural pasture-based system. They're supposed to take that stuff and they're going to convert it to a high source of protein, beef. Um, and their stomachs are designed for that. They evolved for that. That's what they do. They're ruminants and they're herbivores. Well, along come some people and they say, "Oh, let's put a bunch of grain in it." Well, there are a lot of bad things that come along with it. For one thing, it turns the animal system really acidic, and there's a bunch of research that proves that diseases thrive in an acidic environment as opposed to an alkaline. Uh, Disease can't thrive in an alkaline environment. That's why we should be drinking more water and less coffee, less sweet tea, more water, that kind of thing. Um, Let me tilt this down just a little bit. I hope y'all can hear me just fine. On top of that, um, it turns their stomach really acidic, and so they get a bunch of ulcers and things like that. Also, you can taste the acidity in the meat. Um, Beef raised in a feedlot on grain has a different smell to it. It tastes a little different, and the fat is the fat is the only selling point for raising beef in a feedlot like that, other than the efficiency. I mean, how do you feed a booming population type deal? Um, but it's a problem people need to really start looking at what's happening to their meat. It's um, when you have meat done like that, the omega-3 to 6 ratio, which is the healthy fats to bad fats, that totally switches, and so you get all the unhealthy saturated fats, the lower CLAs. I think it tastes worse. Higher calorie content. They're just a bunch of bad things that happen when you start giving animals grain. On top of that, look at how grain is farmed. It uses so much petroleum. It uses so much spray. Grain farming is really really bad for the environment. Much worse than cattle, to be honest. Um, and that's something people don't think about, unfortunately. Okay, so that's grain fed. Grass fed, really there's really very little difference between grass fed and grain fed. And I say that because of all the games people are playing with the terminology. Grass fed means that an animal has been on grass for part of their lives, which doesn't tell anywhere near the whole story. It's kind of frustrating. It's really frustrating, to be honest. Because an animal can grow up just like I told you. The farmer can give it a little bit of grain every now and then when it's a year and a half old, he ships it off to the feedlots. They eat grass out there for a while on the range, on the public lands, and they go into the feedlot. That's considered grass-fed, even though it's feedlot beef. It's been given antibiotics, all that other stuff. Now, if the label says no antibiotics, I'd like to think that they don't give them antibiotics. To be honest, there's an old saying that nobody knows what's happening on a farm at 5 a.m. on a Sunday. The farmer could be giving them a lot of stuff. But there has to be an element of trust in any society, and not just in the food industry, but in any industry. Um, so grass-fed does not mean at all what you think it means. Now, some people will use grass-fed as shorthand, to say that it's eaten grass its whole life, but the term itself doesn't mean that. The big thing when I start telling people that, they say, "Oh, well, how do I know I'm getting what you say I'm getting, or I'm getting what I want?" And the biggest thing I can tell people is know your farmer. Go out, take a farm tour, get to know the person, know the farmer's family. That's really the only way to really absolutely know where your food's coming from. And it's work, I'll be honest. To eat well and to eat in a responsible manner is work. And you're going to pay a little bit more for it. For a whole bunch of reasons. I'll make another video about that, all the economic reasons about why grass-fed beef is more expensive. There's a guy named Forrest something. He lives in Virginia as well. And he wrote a pretty good book called Gaining Ground. Wasn't a lot of hard farming stuff in it. It was just kind of soft science. He did a fine job. But he wrote an article for the Huffington Post last winter called "Why I Can't Raise a $1 Cheeseburger." And I thought that really shed a lot of light that his book didn't quite illuminate on why organic and natural foods are so much more expensive. Oh, talking about terminology, the word natural means absolutely nothing. I use the word natural, but the biggest reason is just because it's easy. I should be drinking water and not tea because that makes my system more acidic instead of alkaline. Yeah, he wrote a pretty good book, to be honest. It was an entertaining read. Okay, and then grass finished means what most people think grass fed should mean. Grass finished means the animal gets no grain from birth to death. There are nothing but grass. Grass, legumes, anything in a pasture-based system. No grain. And then usually people that are doing grass finished, they're also not giving them any added growth hormones, and they're also not doing any antibiotics. That's what we do. We don't give them any grain, no hormones, and no antibiotics. Sorry, I forgot there. It's been a long day. So that's what we do. We think we're raising them right, to be honest. That's the way cattle were raised up until the 50s. And then we had a booming post-war population, the baby boomers. Gas is cheap, corn is cheap, and it made sense to some people, to raise an animal in Virginia, load it up on a trailer when it was a year old, ship it to the Midwest, keep it out there for a year in feedlots, process it out west or in the Midwest, and then ship it back to a grocery store in Virginia. I don't think that makes any sense, to be honest. First off, think about what a waste of natural resources that is. Second off, people want to know where their food comes from. And to be honest, beef maybe isn't to the degree wine is, but with wine you can taste the differences between the topography, and everything else that goes into it. Terrier is what they call that, I think. I don't speak French. Terroir. Terrier. I don't know. I had a roommate that became a sommelier, and he was telling me about it. And pretty much what that is it's almost this mythical term that the grapes and in turn the wine reflects the region that it comes from. It reflects the dirt and the geography and the water, and some people say that the love the farmer puts into raising the grapes. And I think beef is very much like that. You can taste slight differences from region to region, and you can certainly taste huge differences between how it's raised. I mean, I can tell a piece of grain-fed beef by looking at it and by the smell. One, when it cooks, it smells a lot worse, and part of that is because most grass-finished beef that's made on a smaller scale is going to be dry aged, and dry aged is one of the big secrets to good beef. Mass-produced beef, industrial farming, they wet age it, and it does. They say it's the same. It's absolutely not the same. In 3 days, they do what it takes 3 weeks to do, but they use chemicals and fluids and all this other stuff. Instead, when you dry age, you hang a carcass in a controlled chamber where the moisture content's controlled and the temperature's controlled. And what that does is the low humidity pulls the water out of the animal, so you're paying for more meat and less water weight, and that concentrates the beef flavor, and it also starts a effect inside the meat where the tendons and all that stuff, all the tough stuff, is broken down by natural enzymes in the meat. It's called dry aging. It's the way people have done it forever. All the top steakhouses in the country, that's what they're doing. They're getting industrial farm stuff. It's in much smaller quantities, but then they're dry aging it. Dry aging is the real secret to good beef. But remember, there's a huge difference between grain. Well, there's very little difference between grain-fed and grass-fed. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. You can actually qualify to be grass-fed if you're feeding animal. Well, there are all these different things, but I've heard one person say, "Oh, it's grass-fed if you're only giving it 1% or less of its body weight in grain." Well, I'm not a rocket scientist, but 1,000-pound animal, that's 10 pounds of grain a day. That's a tremendous amount of grain. I doubt the feedlots are able to get much more than 10 or 12 pounds of grain in each animal per day. I mean, that's monumental amounts of grain. And that has a really, really negative effect on the animal. So, can you imagine calling something grass-fed when you're feeding it 10 pounds of grain a day? And that's exactly what they're doing. The well-known people in my area that are doing that. And it's frustrating because I'm trying to do something the right way. And there are a lot of loopholes out there, but it's one more reason to get to know your farmer. And remember, grass-fed and finished is really what you want to do, because I use those terms, grass-fed and finished, because that really incorporates everything. That incorporates the natural lifestyle the animal lives, the low stress, the humane, no added hormones, no antibiotics, all this other stuff. One interesting point before I go, I have to say no added hormones. I can't say no hormones because any living creature has hormones. They got fussed at by a USDA and VDAC, which is Virginia Department of Ag and Consumer Services rep. When I first started, they said you can't say no hormones because all living stuff has hormones. So no added growth hormones. We don't put tags in them or anything like that. I mean, my cattle, they eat grass, they drink from the creek, they eat hay, which for almost everybody out there that knows, or for the few that don't, hay is just dried grass. Pretty much what you do is you come through 2 or 3 times in the summer, you let it get tall, you cut it, you ted it out, which is where you spread it, and pretty much all it does is it gets air moving through it and sun beating down on it, it dries it. And then you rake it into these big windrows, and then you come along and you bale it. We actually do all that right out here on the farm, too. We graze our hay fields in the fall, and then we cut them for hay in May. Right now we're only doing one cutting a year. But that's all our cattle do. They free roam, they graze wherever they want, they sleep when they want, they eat when they want. They don't do much. They're kind of lazy, to be honest. But yeah, we're letting cows be cows, and that's the most important thing. You have to let an animal be in its natural environment and respond like it's going to naturally respond. And we're in a closed system, so that means we're not bringing any new animals in. Pasture-based farming. That's what we do. All our farming is revolved around the pasture system. But my name is Breck Light. I'm the owner of Bold Branch Beef, and if you stuck with me this long, thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.